Hello everybody, I'm Itai Matos. I'm an audio technologist and a sound designer for VR and video games. I wanted to share a walkthrough of how I create reactive sound designs for a FireTorch using Cubase, FMOD and Unity. I'll divide this walkthrough into 3 different videos. The first one is preparing our assets in Cubase, so let's dive into that. Okay, so the FireTorch is going to be made out of 3 main elements. The first element is the fire ignition sound, the fire start sample. It's going to be played just once, just when this object is spawned or created at runtime, and that's the only time we're going to hear that. So let's just drag that into our timeline. Can make that a little tighter, have less delay into this sample when the object is spawned. That's good enough. Okay, the 2 other elements are 2 layered loops. The first loop is the fundamental fire sound, which will be constantly heard. We want to give a sense of spatialization for this torch. We want the player to know where the torch is located in virtual space. But at the same time, we don't want to cause any listening fatigueness, since it's a sound that will be constantly playing and it won't be too far away from the player's head. Okay, so since the higher we go in frequency, the more directional it is, we'll want to use mid-high frequencies in the content of this loop to create a sense of spatialization, but not too loud and not too stressful. We just want to have a sense of spatialization without causing any fatigueness. So let's drag into the timeline this first layer. Okay, so first thing, since monophonic content is specialized much better, let's take just one side of this stereophonic recording. I'll just stick with the left track. So frequency-wise, we have a good, healthy, wideband representation of this fire. We can attenuate a little bit of the low end of this layer, since the secondary layer will fill that spectral area. Now we have to find good starting and ending points for our loop. So obviously, first of all, we can see that the actual recording of this fire is dynamic. So we want to include a stable dynamic within our loop. So a common technique of making sure that your loop endpoint will be the exact same amplitude as your starting point is simply cutting and bringing this small portion into the beginning of your loop and then cross-fading between the 2. I like to have it at equal power. Let's just make sure that this loop is seamlessly looping. That's great. Now for the second layer. The second layer will be a more low rumble of the fire, which we will be modulating its amplitude at runtime based on the user's hand velocity. So just like in the real world, when we move the fire quickly, we generate like a low rumble of the fire. So let's bring into our timeline the second layer. Again, it's a stereophonic recording. Let's just break it down into 2 monophonic signals. I'll stick with the left channel. Let's listen to it real quick. So we can take away a little bit of these super high frequencies. Let's just find a good loop points for the secondary layer. Let's have a quick listen to that. Make sure that the loop points, that we have a seamless loop. That's great. So these two loops don't need to have the same exact loop duration, since we're going to handle them independently within FMOD. We're going to play each loop in a separate child event. Let's just break down the fire ignition sound also into a monophonic signal. Let's just have a quick manual simulation of how it's going to behave within FMOD. I'm going to press play. That will simulate the object spawn event, and I won't let the layers loop. I'll just try and modulate the secondary layer amplitude and imagine that the player is moving his hand. That's nice. I think that concludes the simple editing of or preparations of these layers. So let's start exporting that from Cubase. I'm just making sure that the locators are set to the correct loop duration of this layer. We need it at a monophonic mix down of it. 16-bit will be, we can take a 24-bit sample. 48 kilohertz is great. And I'll make sure that I'm exporting it to the right directory. This is great. Save, export. Let's set the locators to the secondary layer, making sure we solo just this layer. Let's export that. That's great. Let's export the ignition sound. Okay, that concludes the editing phase, and in the next video we will see how we import these assets into FMOD and prepare them to be manipulated at runtime. If you have any questions or thoughts, please leave them in the comments section and I'll get back to you.